Hey, the California cannabis industry is one of the most heavily regulated industries in the world. And while that presents a huge problem for growers, it has become a huge opportunity for my two guests, Lewis Alvarez and Richard Newberry. Now, in this episode, Lewis and Richard explain what a smart greenhouse is and the opportunity for smart greenhouses in the global market, and why IoT managed service providers are uniquely qualified to take advantage of this opportunity. So, if you've ever wondered how to get in on the growth of the cannabis market, then head on over to podcast.iotplaybook.com, where you can learn about smart greenhouses and how you can take advantage of this rapidly growing opportunity. Well, welcome everybody. This is Mark Smith. I'm the host of IoT Playbook, and I'm here with Lewis Alvarez, the owner of Alvarez Technology Group. And I've had Lewis on other episodes. We've done webinars together. We've done speaking together. We did a class called IoTMSP Masterclass together. So we worked a lot together. And Lewis is the owner of Alvarez Technology Group in Salinas, California, which is an MSSP, and now I like to say an IoT MSP with several hundred clients. And I'm also here with Richard Newberry, who's the CEO of KMC Control, which is a leading IoT vendor in intelligent buildings. I got that from your LinkedIn profile there. But tell me a little bit more about KMC, Richard.
Well, KMC has been in the smart building space for now 50 years when buildings weren't so smart. And the great opportunity with smart buildings and IoT is buildings are using 15 to 40% more energy than they should be, facilities, and smart buildings, making them more efficient is the low-hanging fruit of IoT from our perspective.
Okay. So, Lewis, how did you get into this whole IoT space? I mean, what's your background and how did you arrive at this opportunity?
Well, we've been around for 20 years next year. Next February, we celebrate our 20th anniversary. And when we first started, we were the traditional IT value-added reseller. That's our roots. And as we evolved as a business over the years, we moved into this managed services area of providing, a set of services for a flat fee to our clients. And where we're located in Salinas, California, it's a very agricultural heavy area. We grow 70 to 80% of the leafy greens that people eat across the United States. Everything from romaine lettuce, which unfortunately has had a little bit of a hit recently, to other leafy greens, asparagus, those sorts of things. So, when people think of farms, they tend to think of the stuff that's growing out in the fields. But the reality is that a lot of farming, modern farming, includes manufacturing. It includes taking all that produce that's being grown in the fields and putting it into bags that you can buy at the grocery store when you go buy the fresh vegetable aisles, those bagged lettuces. So those are manufactured goods, manufactured products. So there's this whole supply chain that's involved in agriculture. And we were starting to see about 7-8 years ago that a lot of our clients were implementing technology to deal with that part of their business. Everything from sensors out in the field to detect nitrates, detect runoffs, detect how much rainfall was falling in a specific area of their fields, through the warehousing where they stored the product until it was being processed and making sure that the temperatures were being controlled accurately. And then finally, in the manufacturing facilities themselves, as these big pieces of equipment were creating those bagged lettuce packages that you buy at the store. And every one of those things was being connected to the network, and we weren't involved. This was line of business applications that were being implemented by managers that were in charge of the fields, in charge of the warehouse, in charge of the manufacturing plant. And they were going directly to the manufacturers of these devices and buying them and implementing them. And we just got involved when they called us and said, hey, we need 10 IP addresses because we're putting some sensors in. And I recognized that part of our client's network environment was growing way faster than the traditional IT space that we occupied. That is, the PCs and the servers and the printers and those sorts of things. That was relatively static. when I started to think about it, I said, we need to get into this IoT environment. We need to get smart about all of these peripheral devices, these edge devices that are being implemented in our clients' networks, or we're going to be left out. And so we started working with our ag clients primarily, excuse me, working to help them implement these technologies by getting them to get us involved at the beginning of the process rather than at the end, so that we can make smart recommendations. Yeah, we didn't know, one field sensor from another, but we could talk about how they interoperated, how secure were they, what is the vendor providing versus what they expect the end user to handle themselves. And so we developed an expertise around that we then translated into other industries, because a warehouse is a warehouse is a warehouse, and a manufacturing facility is a manufacturing facility, whether it's in ag or in light industrial. And then as we were getting into that, the people of California decided to legalize cannabis about 3 years ago. Exactly 3 years ago, actually, in November of 2016. And that presented a whole new opportunity around greenhouses, because cannabis in California has to be grown indoors. And so all of these old greenhouses that here in Monterey County, where we're located, that had once been used for the cut flower industry, were being purchased and bought up by cannabis investors who wanted to grow weed inside. And they all needed to be renovated. They all needed to be fixed up. They needed new technology because they hadn't been updated or really maintained for decades. And that presented another opportunity. And because we already had a history with IoT, we became the go-to company for many of those cannabis concerns that were relocating into this area. And so our IoT journey, in my mind, is just beginning. And we're partnering with KMC because they have a technology solution that works really well in managing greenhouses, in providing inputs from multiple sensors that can be all put into one portal that allows our clients to manage their entire environment using one system, as opposed to a myriad of systems that they use now that are all siloed.
So let's talk about the one case study where you guys are working together on this particular deal. I think it's Matsui, right? And tell me more about Matsui and the problems that they're currently having, and why they need a smart greenhouse versus maybe what they've got or where they're at.
Well, Matsui is Matsui Nursery is located in Salinas, and they're a grower of orchids. I mentioned the cut flower industry earlier, and one of the things that happened when NAFTA was approved back in the 80s was that cut flowers, the roses that you buy for your wife, or the lilies or the tulips that you buy, can be grown anywhere in the world and imported into the United States, but orchids can't. And orchids, because they require dirt to live, have to be grown in the United States. And so the orchid industry, as opposed to the cut flower industry, has been thriving. And Matsui is one of the largest providers of orchids, for things like stores and grocery stores and, malls. Wherever you can buy an orchid, chances are you're buying a Matsui orchid. So they have several dozen greenhouses that they grow their orchids in, because they have to be grown indoors. And they've been doing it for years. So some of these facilities are pretty old. And to Richard's point, they're using more power than they need to. They're not very well. The sensors that they use are old, and the technology, the software that drives a lot of the information that they depend on to grow their orchids is pretty old. And so they're looking to find a new solution that's more consolidated. It's not siloed like their current solutions, and then renovate all of their greenhouses to use it. And so we approached them after talking to Richard's team at KMC and saying, hey, we want to pilot the KMC Commander, this device that is an integrated source, or I guess recipient of all these sensor data for Matsui. and Richard was kind enough to work with us on that, and I think it was a success. What do you think, Richard?
It was a great success. It was a lot of fun working with Michael and the team there at Matsui. What we were able to see is the value Commander could bring to Matsui to allow them to really see true, accurate data real time on any device. They have like 65 greenhouses and they have very few people. So it's kind of nice to be able to look at your phone and see exactly what's happening. But they're getting a lot of relevant data now in the form of trends and alarms and schedules. And now that's going to allow them, now that the platform is in, it's going to allow them to determine their weak areas. And as their budget allows, they can renovate, retrofit each of the greenhouses to bring in new technology that Alvarez Technology Group and KMC can bring to bear. So we're really excited about it. We also, one of the things that I think is important as we talk through this opportunity, because it is just the beginning, as Louis said. We saw maybe 3 years ago that this whole convergence of IT and OT, like Louis mentioned, as an IT company, he was not getting in on the physical side of all the networks. And on the network side, our OT partners, they were realizing they had to get these static IPs from IT. So what we're really seeing is Intel like to say IT plus OT equals IoT. But it's a huge thing that's happening. And the people that have the relationships like Louis with these growers and with their existing business gives them the greatest opportunity to move into smart facilities and really bring a lot of value. And what we can do with Louis is we can bring in our OT partners to really help facilitate them moving into that space of smart buildings.
Yeah, and that's a key point because as we move forward, we know that we don't have the expertise at this point in-house to be able to deploy this technology, as well as some of the partners that are already working with KMC. And KMC's already connected us with a partner that's close enough that is willing to help us as these opportunities present themselves, because we're not just looking at Matsui, but we think this technology, especially in this area, has relevance for the cannabis industry. As I mentioned, they had the cannabis industry came in and bought up all of these old greenhouses. And initially, they basically just wanted to get them set up to the point where they can produce product. But now, because of regulation as well as a lot of external factors, they're starting to renovate these facilities. So we're talking to them and saying, hey, this is the point in time when you can bring in smart technology, because we can save you manpower. You have, it's a very labor intensive industry right now, and that's causing some issues because labor is hard to find. So for them, anything that they can do to automate their processes, anything that they can do to minimize the amount of people they need to run the greenhouse is worth the investment. So we're having those conversations with some of our cannabis clients today.
So break down the Matsui a little bit. Like what's going in that particular offer that you've put in place with those guys, and give me an idea, because you maybe describe a little bit more what Commander does, what sort of it hooks up to, and then there's a certain amount of CapEx, right? They're spending, but then there's like monthly recurring, like a service fee around that. What does that look like?
I'll let Richard answer that question.
Yeah, the initial installation of Commander, it's a combination of a software hardware solution, and we are connecting Commander to our sensors inside the greenhouse and properly positioning those sensors to be able to measure temperature, humidity, and CO2. And that information from those sensors is being sent via the gateway and go into our cloud, so that Michael at Matsui can begin to see in that greenhouse where he has issues with temperature or humidity or CO2, and those are very important things in growing orchids. And because if they got out of range on their temperature for about an hour, they could lose $100,000 worth of orchids, is my understanding. So it's a simple implementation to just get those three basic pieces of data: temperature, humidity, and CO2. Then in the future, as their budget allows, and that's really an operating expense. Where it's going to get into capital is when they make the decision. They've got 20 plus year old PLCs. They've got software that's 20 plus years old and is not really performing the way it should. And that will allow them to budget that kind of retrofit. And they're going to find out that they don't really need to put a real expensive PLCs. They can use KMC Controls and have a lot lower cost as far as renovation.
Define PLC just for the uninitiated here.
It's a programmable logic controller.
Okay, all right.
That is overbuilt for really what they need is what we're saying, because it doesn't have to be in the space; it can be outside the space.
Now, is it going to get to the point where not only does it measure all these temperature and humidity and CO2, but can it then adjust the environment through the HVAC system or whatever to compensate because maybe there's a lot of sunlight on it or it's at nighttime or whatever to even out within a certain tolerance?
Exactly. That would be the next step. Right now it's monitoring only, but Commander has the capability of monitoring and controlling. So it would control the shading that is involved in the greenhouse. When the sun gets too strong, too bright, the shades would be activated and moved accordingly. So it would give them complete control of all of their mechanical systems in each greenhouse.
So when you're talking about the person, and you mentioned Michael a few times, what is Michael's role? And then is there another person involved, maybe like the owner of that is like the business decision maker, or is Michael's more the beneficiary as the operational guy? Tell me about these different roles in a smart greenhouse.
Sure. Michael is actually a new breed of operations person that we're seeing more and more in the ag industry. This ag tech specialist, so an agricultural technician. When you think of ag, like I said earlier, you tend to think of tractors and kind of the stuff going on in the field. But as all of this technology is being infused throughout their operations, they need somebody smart who's capable of managing that and providing information to whoever the ownership team is, whether it's a single owner or an executive team, so that they can understand how to optimize the use of technology. Because a lot of these guys in the ag industry, they want to be farmers, they want to be growers, they don't want to be technologists, and so they depend on people that work for them to do this. And in the past, it's usually been whoever the line of business manager had to get smart, and they would get approached by a vendor, or they would approach vendors and say, "Hey, I need to solve this problem." And now what we're seeing is that there's a defined role within a lot of ag companies, more and more, that is in charge of technology for the operational side, not for the traditional IT side. This is the stuff that's happening in the greenhouse. And that's what Michael's role is. He's a one-man band, if you will, that runs around and maintains all of this antiquated technology. So when he was presented with Commander, it was just an eye-opening experience to him about what the art of the possible was. Because before he was limited to just what he knew. And now he sees that there's a great deal more that they can do with technology to improve their outcomes, which is really, at the end of the day, why you do this is, how do we grow better orchids that last longer, that don't die when they get to the store, and managing all of the minutia of the growing of the orchids is really where that's done.
Okay. And so like a fully implemented smart greenhouse, what would that, okay, so it's not a greenhouse necessarily built from scratch. You're taking an existing one and retrofitting it and stuff. So what is a smart greenhouse? Not the building itself, but the controls and everything. What's a project like that valued at?
It could be in the millions, or it can be at least in the tens of thousands, right?
Okay.
And you brought up a really good point, and that is, the majority of devices that need to be managed and monitored already exist, right? So nobody is going to come to us and say, "Hey, I'm willing to spend the millions of dollars that it would take to strip out all of the equipment that I already have in my greenhouse and put in brand new manageable stuff." What they're going to say to us is, "Hey, I got all this legacy stuff in here. I'm not going to replace it. You need to figure out how to manage it and monitor it." And that's what Commander does. It's a flexible enough platform that you can take legacy HVAC systems or legacy lighting systems or legacy control systems and automate those and monitor those, because that's where the real potential is in this industry, is being able to go in and use technology that's relatively affordable in the grand scale of things for these growers and these operators, instead of forcing them to basically tear down the greenhouse and start from scratch.
And so, from a technology stack point of view, Richard, then, a lot of times when we talk about IoT, we also mention intelligent edge and AI. My sense is that KMC has a lot of that in there, because you have to send every single piece of data to the cloud in real time. That could be so something's happening at the edge there, where you're doing some sort of calculations there, maybe sending up summary data, and maybe even use some AI. Tell me more about that.
Yeah. So at the edge, first of all, our controllers, which we put in the Matsui greenhouse, has programs built into it, and it's been very important for us. We make sure that the schedules and alarms and trends are in the controller as well as in the cloud, because one of the things we always run into is the strength of internet or Wi-Fi. If it gets disconnected, you got to make sure at the device level things don't change.
Right.
So it's not totally relied upon it. So we're only sending to the cloud certain data. They're able to determine how often the data is extracted for the trending, to be able to determine that the kind of information they want. So yeah, there's a lot of intelligence built in, and then we offer analytic solutions on top of Commander to really take the data beyond trends, alarms, and schedules, and really develop algorithms to really, and that's going to be very important with the cannabis growers, because there's so much involved there, from tracking everything from the beginning to the end. All of that can be built on top of Commander. So Commander, again, is that platform that allows them to build on it. And as we have, again, the domain expertise. So we have a very large partner in Colorado, and they've been at this a little bit longer, the cannabis piece.
Yeah.
They have quite an expertise and dealing with all the equipment. So if you're talking about a new facility or one that you got to completely kind of change it, we are tied in with a lot of the manufacturers of the equipment, whether it's chillers, boilers, whatever it might be for that facility. We have a lot of those connections already. Commander can connect to those pieces of equipment automatically, all of the sensors. We use an open platform, so it isn't just our sensors that they would have to connect to. It can be any sensors or devices that communicate with open protocols that we've defined in the smart building space.
Okay. And so, I always like talking about the IoT managed service part. So, Louis, what do you see as the typical managed, or after the initial equipment is put in, what's the managed service that goes on top of this?
Well, it'll be helping them maintain the sensors, helping them maintain Commander, providing them information on how they can extend Commander beyond the platform that they currently have. So it's much like our traditional managed services in the IT space. People are buying. We expect that in the IoT world, people will buy peace of mind, which is what we sell in the IT space. And having a reliable partner that can come in for for any issue and any problem, without having to worry that you're getting nickel and dime to death because you have to pay time and materials, is really important. So what the pricing model looks like for something like this, yet to be determined, right? There's a lot of variables that go into it. But there's a lot of interest already in talking to the principals at Matsui. As they move forward, they're really interested in making sure that they take into account, hey, what's the ongoing services that we'll have to pay for, as well as the initial capital expenditure of deploying this technology.
Okay. And so for them, when they're looking at, the investment side, it's offsetting by cost reduction and, potentially not losing some crops. How about increasing the level of crops, things like that?
Yeah, increasing production and increasing yields is always something that growers are interested in at every level. Orchids, cannabis, but even leafy greens and other products. If you can increase your yields without increasing the cost of the yields, then that's money right to the bottom line, because the demand for the product is out there. So that it's not like they don't have people that want to buy their product. They're just limited by the amount that they can produce. So if you can take all of those greenhouses and produce more product and produce better product, then you're going to win, especially if it doesn't add any additional cost, because you don't have to add people, or you don't have to add a lot of additional cost to the yield production.
So and I've heard too, in terms of increasing yield, there's grow lights, there's even AI looking at plants and working through all that and saying, okay, I got the same square footage, but if I can get 2 to 3x the yield, because I control that environment and I can literally dial it in. I mean, Richard, do you see the day when people could say, hey, I've set up my greenhouse, I want to simulate an environment in Napa Valley, or I want to simulate an environment in Italy? You could just dial it in and literally simulate an ideal growing environment for the perfect variation of hemp they want to grow that produces a certain high quality CBD, for example.
It's amazing. I sometimes hesitate to say this, but I tell people with this and in artificial intelligence and analytics, it's up to your imagination. It's kind of mathematics, it's learning, and that's all going to be very possible. To add on to what Louis mentioned, yes, you want to grow more, but in the smart building space, one thing that we've realized as we've partnered with Intel on the Commander solution, and it is a market-ready solution in Intel's IoT Alliance, which means we have thousands of Intel salespeople really bringing leads, which we're looking for more partners like Louis to help us follow up on. But the fact is, and we've said it before, but I think it bears repeating, and that is these facilities are spending way too much on energy. And that becomes very important when you get into cannabis and all the regulations about how much energy you can use. So regulations are going to dictate, and it won't be an ROI decision. It's going to be mitigating the regulations and making sure you're meeting them when it comes to how much energy you're using. And that gets missed a lot. And also, we've talked a bit about the fact that there's fewer and fewer people. It's hard, the biggest challenge for any business is getting people and keeping them to be able to use technology to expand what one person or 2 or 3 people can do tenfold because of technology. That's also very, very important. So it's huge on the cost side of things. And then lastly, what we're always involved with any smart building opportunity is it's either comfort of crops or it's comfort of people, and it's safety, and all of those things play into the whole solution also.
Okay, so I know in the show notes I'll include, because you guys have produced a few videos about Matsui, this case study and whatnot, so I'll make sure to include those, because I think it'll really help people see some visual stuff, and also links to Commander to find out more information. So in the show notes, I'll include links and stuff. But people can follow up. Like if in fact, I've heard from people say, "Hey, I've got this client, and I've heard Lewis talk about smart greenhouses, but I would like to know more about how I would do that, or how I'd partner with somebody on my first deal." How could they do that? Can they reach out to you, Richard? Or
Yeah, I mean, they can go to kmccommander.com and request for us to get in touch with them, and we'd be happy to do that, our team. So that would be an easy way to do that, kmccommander.com.
Okay. So we'll put all links that in the show note. Also links to Lewis too, if you'd like to partner with him, find out more information. But yeah, I see this as a big opportunity, not just, as you've mentioned, orchids and cannabis, but I think even before the show started, Lewis, you were talking about, hey, there's places all over the world that have to grow food and different things inside of an enclosed building like this. I mean, talk a little bit more about that.
Yeah, we're seeing an increase, even in California, that is famous for its fertile ground. You're seeing more and more companies exploring and moving toward indoor growth. That is creating huge greenhouses to grow products that were typically you've grown outdoors, and that's being done primarily for food safety reasons and to control the entire process, right? Like I mentioned at the beginning, romaine got a bad rap recently when there was that big recall of romaine from the Salinas Valley because of E. coli contamination. And that's one of the problems of growing outdoors is regardless of what you do to try to safeguard the fields, you got birds landing on them, you got all sorts of things that happen out there because you can't put a dome over these fields outdoors. So if you can grow indoors, you can one, reduce the amount of soil. You can use hydroponics. You can do all sorts of stuff with technology to improve yields in smaller spaces. So greenhouses are becoming more and more popular, and we recognize that opportunity, even in our neck of the woods, means that we can grow our greenhouse business as we get smarter and more proficient in Commander and how to pitch it to clients. But right now, we rely on Richard's team, and they're really great to work with. I mean, they're very accessible, very good about jumping on a call with a client if we have some questions that we can't answer. And we expect that as this growth of greenhouses for multiple growing situations continues, it's there's no end to the potential.
I mentioned I happened to be in one of your conferences where the tomato grower was talking about a workman's comp problem that he had, that because they had to go out physically visit the building where they clean the tomatoes, and because they had to go on Sunday, his workman's comp went up $90,000. And I think you said you signed them up as a client.
We did, yeah. We signed them up last month, and we're working right now to get some connectivity out to where he needs to monitor those tanks. And as soon as he does, we're going to be talking to Richard's team about, hey, we need to get Commander out there, and we need to give this guy visibility so that he can get rid of those trips out on the weekends and then reduce his workers' comp by, $90,000 a year. I mean, that's the ROI there is really, really easy for him.
Right. And I think that kind of a labor thing you're mentioning with all this is a big deal, a factor. And so when people are listening to problems, they need to listen to a new set of problems, right? Mm-hmm. That when the guy mentions his workman's comp, maybe in the past you might have gone, well, that's not in my domain, but exactly. Now it's like, no, bullseye. We can solve that problem.
When I go into, we occasionally I go on sales calls with our guys, and when I walk into a warehouse or I walk into a manufacturing facility, I'm like, all right, this is going to be fun. I see all these little devices, how they're all connected, and how can we manage all of those.
And I think, Richard, you're saying in general, like what kind of savings in energy can people expect?
Well, it again depends on the investment. I can say this, that the Department of Energy has done a lot of studies, and buildings in general are using 15 to 45% more in energy than they should be. So there's other studies that have been done that would indicate that just by scheduling your equipment, adding schedules, which is a basic thing we can do, it can save 10% of your energy. And then you go on beyond that, which would require more investment in some things. But what I see happening is the Commander as a platform allows you to go in and immediately solve an immediate pain point, but then gives you the visibility to plan out your annual budgets on how you can save energy and be able to measure it very clearly, because now you have the data and you can track it.
Great.
Yeah, and to add to what Richard said, here in California next year, we have a new law that goes into effect. It's called Zero Net Energy Law, and that's for new residential construction. Will require that the house or apartment building generate as much power as it uses. So there's two ends to that equation. One is generating power, which is going to mean the solar business is going to go crazy next year in California. But then there's also cutting down the amount of energy that's being used and understanding where that energy is being used. And so next year, that starts with residential, but within 5 years, it moves into the commercial space. And, as people know, as California goes, so goes the rest of the country. Eventually, the zero net energy initiative and movement is going to spread across the country. And you're going to see commercial buildings wanting to figure out, how do we reduce our costs? Because energy prices, it'll become a penalty for you to use too much energy. So if you could figure out how to reduce your power consumption, it's going to be something that I think every business will be concerned with over the next decade.
All right. Richard, any last thoughts on that?
We're just looking forward to this incredible opportunity. And I'm looking forward to getting more business and working more with Louis. And I would recommend that if you are just an MSP and want to become an IoTMSP, you need to talk to Louis, and we would love to work with you. And let's go make it happen in 2020.
Let's go make it happen in 2020. I love ending on that. Well, thanks, Richard. Thanks, Louis, for this. I really appreciate this time, and look forward to seeing a lot more IoT MSPs in the future. Thanks to you guys. All right.
Thanks, Mark.
Okay, bye.